feeling ready for Purim. We're doing the Sicha on Purim this week. Seif Aleph. Al ha'amur b'siyum v'chosam ha'megillah. Regarding what it says at the very end of the Megillah, that the Megillah tells us, Ki Mordechai HaYehudi ratzui larov echav, that Mordechai was beloved by most of his brothers. Okay, so the stress is on the fact that it doesn't say ratzui le'echav, that he was beloved or roundly accepted by or embraced, but it says that he was beloved by most of his brothers, which seems like a very, very pointed kind of comment, because here Mordechai just brought the Jews through a very big crisis, and you would think that he was roundly accepted as their hero. But somehow the pasuk signals to us that there was some controversy surrounding him, or some people were holding back in terms of their ratifying his approach. So nothing new here. They say that Jewish leadership is not for a good Jewish boy or girl. It's could be very difficult. Amar Razal b'Gemara. So on this concept, our rabbis taught us in the Gemara, l'roiv echav. What does it mean? Most of his brethren, v'loy l'chol echav. But it doesn't say to all of his brethren. Malami, this teaches us shapir shumi menu mixa Sanhedrin, that a part of the Sanhedrin, a small part, mixas means a small part, kind of distance themselves from him. Shekain echav heim chaverav shahayu michlal anshe knesset gdela. That the word his brethren, the particular term that's used in this pasuk, brethren, refers to his colleagues in the anshe knesset gdela, in the great assemblage. Umefarish Rashi, and Rashi comments as Tamam shel mixas has Sanhedrin. He comments on why a small part of the Sanhedrin, a small demographic, would distance themselves from him. Shapir Shemi Mordechai, and Rashi says Lefi shabatal midivrei Torah v'nichnas l'shrora. The reason they distance themselves from him is because he entered into the leadership arena, and in doing so, he was mevatel Torah. He was unable to learn the same amount of Torah that he was learning earlier, because he was busy with his duties as a leader. And for this reason, a small part of the Sanhedrin, of the Anshe Knesset Gdela, distanced themselves from him. They separated themselves from him. And in a continuum over there, continuing on from this point, the Gemara teaches Gadol Talmud Torah Yeser Matzal's Nefashos, that learning Torah is greater than saving lives. And the Gemara bolsters that teaching and proves it, because the Gemara continues to say, Demi Kara Chashiv Leila Mordechai Basar Dalit, that initially Mordechai ranked as the fifth highest person in the Sanhedrin, in the Anshe Knesset Gdela. Ulebasayif, but afterwards, meaning after he took on leadership responsibilities for the Jewish people, Basar Chamisha, he ranked sixth, because Basar means after. So Basar Chamisha means after the fifth, which is the sixth. So he went down in ranking from being the fifth to being the sixth greatest person in the Sanhedrin. Meikara ksiv chule, ulebasayif ksiv chule. So the Gemara says, where do we have proof of his initial ranking, which was fifth, and then that he went down to sixth? Shetchila bepasuk be'ezra. And so the Gemara brings down a pasuk from the Navi Ezra, and there we learn that Nimna Mordechai b'Makom Chamishi, that Mordechai was appointed in the fifth slot of the Sanhedrin, But at the end of it, later in his life or later in his trajectory, the pasuk b'Nehemiah, we learn from a pasuk in the Navi Nehemiah, Nimna Shishi, that he held the sixth appointment, the sixth lot. Lefi Shenasa Mordechai Sar b'Intayim, what changed his ranking? Because he became a Sar, because he became official in the government. Yarad mechashivusay etzel chachamim, and so that led to his demotion. He went lower in terms of his importance as to how his colleagues saw him, the other chachamim. Okay, so that's the Gemara on this pasuk. The Eina Muvan, and the Rebbe said it says it's not understood. Klal zeh, that Godol Talmud Torah Yosem Hatzalos Nefashos, this rule that the Gemara teaches, that learning Torah is even greater than saving lives. Hayu Chazal Yecholim Lelamdoi Mipashtus Hakasav B'Megillah Gufa L'Roiv Echav. If that's what the Gemara wants to teach us, the Gemara could have taught us that we learned from the pasuk L'Roiv Echav, that it says that that he was beloved by most of his brethren. So on that, the Gemara could have taught us that learning Torah is greater than saving lives. The Gemara could have said, Melame Shapirshu Mimenu Miksa Sanhedrin. We learn the word most, and not all of his brethren, teaches us that a small group within the Sanhedrin kind of separated themselves from him after he became part of the government. The Gemara could have explained, Shariatam Shapirshu, the reason that they separated themselves from him, Haya Mishum Shabitel Midivrei Torah, was because he abnegated himself from the amount of Torah study that he was engaged in earlier. And why did he do that? Because he was engaged in saving lives. So if the Gemara could have taught us this, the Imkain, Lama nitzrachnu lelimud hanal shahu mishinui seder bavad. Umedaber shaloi b'mkaimei umishnei psukim sheb'shnei sifrei Tanakh nefradim. Why does the Gemara have to go into telling us how he was demoted in terms of his ranking? He went from being fifth to being the sixth, and bring it from a different place. And not only is it a different place, but it's two different Sfarim in the Nevi'im. It seems very involved and very unnecessary when the Gemara could have just gone straight for the jugular and said, it says Raiv and not Kol Echav. It says most of his brothers embraced him, but not all. And we learned from this that it's greater to study Torah than even to engage in saving lives. And for this reason, he suffered this demotion. So the Rebbe says, why does the Gemara have to tell us what the ranking was and how he went down and where we prove this from? So Yesh Mefarshim, there are Mefarshim that address this question, and they explain Shemin Alashin b'Megillah, that if you look at the verbiage, the terminology in the Megillah, Efshar Lilmaid Rak, Shebe'ene HaSanhedrin Haya Talmud Torah Chashuv Yosem Hatzalos Nefashos. If you look just at the pasuk in the Megillah, you might take away that from the perspective of the Sanhedrin, learning Torah is more important than saving lives. Aval ein kan raya shemishamayim hiskimu lokach. But we don't have proof that heaven agrees with this, that Hashem agrees with this. You might just think that his colleagues, his brethren in the Sanhedrin, kind of looked askance at his new activities. They looked down at what he was doing. And so, for this reason, it's necessary for the Gemara to bring down proof from Nehemiah and bring down proof from Ezra, that the Torah itself alludes to this by telling us his difference in the ranking. And it's in a pasuk. It tells us in Ezra what his ranking was prior to his involvement in governmental matters. Then in Nehemiah, we learn that he was demoted. So from this, we learn that Hashem agreed that Gadol Torah miatzalos nefashos. Aval al derech hapshat, but the Rebbe pushes back at this as an explanation. He says, simply speaking, tirut ze eino mechaver. This explanation doesn't really compute. Because those who distanced themselves, who separated themselves, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say distance, they separated themselves from him. They were not pedestrian people. Ella Echav, Chavrei HaSanhedrin. They were very, very learned people. They were the members of the Sanhedrin. Shin Yonam, Bahana Gosam, Hupsak Halacha Al Pitera. And their whole thing, their entire life, their whole comportment is all about Torah. It's all about being adjudicators of halacha. So after you're talking about Echav being Chavrei HaSanhedrin, you still need a proof that this is what Hashem thinks. Here you trust this group of people. They are the Sanhedrin. They are the final arbiters on all matters of halacha. And as we know historically, not just for their time, but until Mashiach comes, because after that, I mean, they were the final arbiters. So you still need a proof from other Sfarim that if they came to a decision that learning Torah is greater than saving lives, you don't trust them. You need to bring proof from Ezra and Nehemiah. So Rebbe says, it's not computing. Base. Rebbe has two more questions. Aleph. Once we accept this axiomatic rule that learning Torah is greater than saving lives, im kain, if so, lama yarad Mordechai mishum kach, lefi shebatal mitalmud Torah, rak bedarga achas b'seder hashemis, mibasar dalid lebasar hey. Why did he only go down in his ranking 1 point from 5th place to 6th place? If it's so clear that learning Torah is so much greater than saving lives, so they should have booted him out of the whole Sanhedrin. Seemingly, it would seem he shouldn't even be counted in the Sanhedrin at all. Shin yanam hu psak din Torah, because the whole Indian of Sanhedrin is to learn Torah. Once he busies himself with diplomatic matters, with governmental matters, he should have been booted out. That's it. He should have been dismissed. And Beis, mimashmas hapasuk, move on. From the pasuk in the Megillah, we understand she shraras Mordechai b'yosem bishna lamelech archa meshech zman. We understand from the pshat of the psukim in the Megillah that Mordechai's leadership was actually, he was Mishnah Lamelech, he was the viceroy. He wasn't just busy with governmental matters. He occupied very high position, and he did so for quite a bit of time. Ubizman zeh haya ratzui rak l'roiv echav. And during this time, he was beloved only to most of his brothers. Why? Because there were those who separated themselves from him. So if this is so, then meaning you can't have it both ways. If what he was doing was correct according to the Torah, so he should have proven that what he was doing was correct to his colleagues, because he obviously was not oblivious to the fact that they were distancing themselves from him, that they were separating themselves from him, that there were some people who felt that what he was doing was wrong. But he didn't just do this for like a week or two. This wasn't a transient matter. And also, he didn't just have 1 foot in governmental matters. He was Mishnah Lamelech. He was the viceroy. So why didn't he explain himself and maybe win over his colleagues? V'im and if in fact what he was doing was not correct, haya alav lifresh min hashrara, he should have taken himself out of governmental matters. And in that case, if he would have recused himself from his governmental responsibilities, then he would have once again enjoyed the embrace of all of his colleagues. They would have all felt he was doing the right thing. So in other words, was he doing the right thing or was he doing the wrong thing? If he was doing the right thing, why was he unable to explain this to his colleagues? Why was he unable to win them over so that he would have been beloved by all? If he was not doing the right thing, then why didn't he step down? And then he would have once again been beloved by everyone. Gimel. V'yuvon habir bazeh, and we'll understand this inyan al pidiyuk b'lashon hamegillah v'drashas razal hanal. We'll understand it by looking more carefully at the specificity of the language that's used here. Ratzoi l'roiv echav. He was beloved to most of his colleagues, meaning the vast majority rallied around him. And the Gemara says, Pershu mimenu mikza Sanhedrin. Only a small part of the Sanhedrin separated themselves from him. I knew this means. Sheroiv echa b'Sanhedrin hiskimu lanhaga zu shel Mordechai. Most of the members of Sanhedrin agreed that what Mordechai was doing was correct. V'im kain. And if so, move on b'pashtos, it's understood simply. Shemizeh shepirshu mimenu mikza Sanhedrin ein kol raya shetal mutar gadol me'atzalos nefashos. So from the fact that a small portion of the Sanhedrin separated themselves from him, we don't have proof that Talmud Torah, that learning Torah, is greater than saving lives. Va'adrabah, on the contrary, ifcha mistabra, the opposite is more logical to conclude. If most of the Sanhedrin embraced him, if most of the Sanhedrin were on, let's just say, his side, as it were, so then we would conclude the opposite, that saving lives is more important than learning Torah. Otherwise, why would most of the Sanhedrin be in agreement with him? And this also explains why Mordechai only lost 1 point in his ranking. Ki adraba, because on the contrary, Roiv Chavrei HaSanhedrin Hiskimu Lanhaga Zu Shel Mordechai. Most of the Sanhedrin agreed that what Mordechai was doing was correct. So once we understand that it says he was Ratzoi L'Roiv Echav, most of the Sanhedrin, he was beloved amongst them, he was respected, they rallied around him, he only lost 1 point in his ranking. So now we have a question on the other side. Aleph. Once we understand that most of the Sanhedrin agreed with what he was doing, so their opinion should have completely neutralized the opinion of the small demographic that didn't agree with him. They were miktsas. They were a small group, and Rav and the largest majority agreed with Mordechai. The Imkain. So if the majority agreed with him, why were they unable to convince the rest of the people? So why indeed did they separate themselves? Did they put distance between themselves and Mordechai? Why wasn't the majority opinion strong enough to neutralize the minority opinion completely, so that we would never have heard of it? That would never have been a word in the Megillah. There were so many people that loved Mordechai, and yet the Megillah says, Roiv Echav. Why is that important to underscore? Base. Lefize Nimsa. Once we understand this, then based on this, we understand, we find that that the two things that our sages taught in the Gemara in one continuum, that on one hand, Pershu Mimenu Rak Miksa Sanhedrin, that only a small part of the Sanhedrin separated themselves from him. And on the other hand, the Gemara teaches Gadol Talmud Torah Yosematzal's Nefashos, that learning Torah is greater than saving lives. Once we understand this, we see that these two limudim, these two teachings in the Gemara, soishrim zeh zeh, they contradict each other. Because on one hand, we're being told that only a small demographic felt that what Mordechai was doing was wrong. And then the Gemara teaches us this very seemingly categoric statement that you learn from this, that learning Torah is greater than saving lives. Seems like it's a contradiction. Dalet. The Rebbe says, in order to understand this, we have to preface with yet another thing we need to understand, another diuk, another specificity in the terminology. That the Gemara says, Pershu mimenu mikta Sanhedrin, that a small number of the members of the Sanhedrin separated themselves from him. V'lo cholku olav, but it doesn't say that they differed in opinion with him. And it doesn't say that their spirits were not aligned with him, or something like that. The Pershu mimenu, but using the words Pershu mimenu, they separate themselves from him. Perusha, the explanation is, Loi shahayu b'machleikas imai. It's not telling us that they were in an argument with him. Mishum shalafi datam hanhagas Mordechai ena al pitera. What we're being taught here is that they were not in an argument because they felt that what he was doing was contrary to the Torah chas v'shalom. Ella sherachaku mimenu, but rather they distanced themselves from him. Because they held on to a different modality, a different opinion regarding the hanhaga, the comportment, the way in which the members of the Sanhedrin should conduct themselves. Oy Talmud Chacham Bechlal. Or maybe even their opinion was different in terms of Talmidei Chachamim. V'loi darkoi darkam. And what Mordechai was doing was not their way. His way was not their way. Aval af heim hiskimu shanhagas Mordechai benegei la'atzmoi hiderach al pitera. But even this small demographic that distanced themselves from him, they agreed that regarding Mordechai and his life, what he was doing was correct. Hasvaras ha'inyan. Sorry, did somebody ask something or say something? Hasvaras ha'inyan tuvan. So understanding the kind of the thought process will be understood. We're going to be able to get some insight into what was going on between Mordechai and his colleagues in the Sanhedrin, the Rebbe says, by recounting a story regarding the Ragachavar Goin, and the explanation of that story. So the Rebbe says, as Medinas Russia, v'higia l'Riga, after my father-in-law, the Frierdiker Rebbe, left Russia, and he came to Riga in Latvia, Ziman Sham Asifa Shel Rabbanim, he convened a meeting of Rabbanim, Manhigim, Vaskonim, and also leaders and people involved in public affairs. And he did this L'Toivas Yehudi Russia. And he convened this gathering to work towards bettering the lives of the Jews in Russia. Bein hamizumanim hayagam haragat shavar. And amongst those who were invited was the Rogatchover going? Ba'asifa zu, ratzu lahakim va'ad, sheyis asef mizman lizman, v'yadun ketzad lenahel asapa'olos avor Yehudi Russia. And at this convening, it was decided to create a committee that would meet from time to time, and they would discuss and they would analyze and conclude what activities would work best to help the Jews who are left in Russia. Ubikshu meharagachover sheishtate bivadze, and they asked the Rogatchover to be part of this committee. They wanted him on the committee. Aval hu sirev, but he refused. V'hizbir, and he explained his refusal. Sheshe'elas knisasai levad, that the question of his joining the Vad, the committee, tluya b'machleikis ben haTalmud Bavli Yerushalmi, is based on a machlekes, a difference of opinion in the Bavli and the Yerushalmi. And what is that? Isa b'Gemara b'Brachos. In the Gemara in Masechet Brachos we learn Chasidim Harishonim Hayushayim Teisha Shayis B'Yom B'Tefillah, that the earlier great people, because we know that the word Chasidim now is not talking about Chasidim as we use that term after the Baal Shem Tov, but Chasidim were people who went above and beyond what's necessary. And the Gemara says that they used to spend 9 hours a day davening. Umakshina. So we have a question. Im Kain, if they used to spend 9 hours a day davening, Tairasan ha'ech mishtameres, umelachtan ha'ech nasis. How is their Torah preserved, and how is their work done? How did they have enough time to learn properly? How did they have enough time for other things that they need to do? Umetaretz b'Gemara, and the Gemara answers this question and says, Ela mitoich shechasidim heim Torasa mishtameres umelachtan mizbareches. The Gemara says that the reason they were able to daven 9 hours was because for these Chasidim, they were blessed that their Torah was preserved and their work was blessed. And so they didn't suffer any lack in the quality of their learning and in their output because they were zeichet to this special bracha. In Yizeh Muva Gam B'Yerushalmi, the same idea, the same concept is mentioned in the Gemara Yerushalmi, aval b'shinui, but slightly differently. Instead of like what it says in the Bavli, that the reason that the Chasidim Rishonim were able to daven for 9 hours was because their Torah was preserved and their work was blessed. Isa, it says in the Yerushalmi, Alidei shahayu Chasidim, because they were Chasidim, haisa bracha nisenes b'Torasan, ubracha nisenes b'malachtan. So it says it's slightly different. It says because they were Chasidim, they merited a blessing in their Torah and a blessing in their work. V'hachiluk bein Torasa mishtameres ubein bracha nisenes b'Torasan. So what's the difference between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi? What is the difference between saying their Torah was preserved to saying there was a blessing that somehow informed their Torah? So muvanhu, the understanding of this is as follows. Mishtameres, when you use the term mishtameres, it's preserved. What it means is that their Torah was not forgotten. But it doesn't mean that something new was added to the Torah. It doesn't mean that there was more added above what could normally and logically and plausibly be learned in the small amount of time that was left to them that they weren't davening. Masha Enkin, but in contradistinction, bracha nisenes b'Torah, but when the Yerushalmi says there was a blessing in their Torah, perushay, this means shehitzlichu lahavin ulahaskil miyad lo hayu shayim. It means that the bracha that was put in their Torah allowed them to be able to understand and to grasp immediately. And so they didn't have to waste time in trying to figure it out. You know, sometimes you learn something and you can't get it. And you learn it again and again, and it takes a lot of time. So the Rebbe is explaining that when the Yerushalmi says that bracha nisenes, it means exactly that there was a bracha that allowed them to learn with such clarity and with such alacrity that they were able to learn a lot more than you would think you could learn in the small amount of time left over for them after they finished davening. Hainu, meaning the loizu babat she'ena mashaychachim es limudam ela oidze sheba lehem haisafa bahavana havanas v'yedias haTorah. It's not just that they didn't forget because they didn't have enough time to review, but it's that they actually managed to learn additional amounts because their understanding and their knowledge was deepened and elongated because of this bracha. Shebizman limudim hamuat, in the small amount of time that they had allotted, matzlichim heim lahavin ulahaskil miyad. They were successful in understanding and grasping the Torah immediately. Masha karagil al pitivam hayaderish mehem zman aruch baharbe belimud haTorah, where naturally and normally it would have taken a lot more time. V'chein hugam benidun didan sim haragat shavar, and the Ragat Shavar concluded his refusal to join the committee by saying that al yedei hishtatfusay bevad behechrach yitzdarech levatel mizmanei belimud haTorah. If he's going to join the Vad, if he's going to somebody help me with the word.
Participate.
Sorry? Participate. Thank you. Yes, if he's going to participate in the committee, then perforce he will have to be mevatel time from learning Torah. There's no other way. The imkain, and if so, lefia Yerushalmi shal yudei shahayu chasidim haisa bracha nisenes b'terasan lo yechzer lo davar b'dias haTorah. If you go according to the Yerushalmi, then he won't be missing anything in his knowledge of Torah. But the Ragat Shavar explained, but the halacha goes according to the Bavli. Sheteirasam rak mishtameres, that the Torah of the Chasidim was just preserved, but not blessed. Im kain techaser loy haisafa belimud v'dias haTorah shahisaloi ilulama Torah gambis manzeh balzeh einenu yochel levater. So since the halacha goes according to the Bavli, it means that it will just mean that it'll have this chus that whatever Torah he has will be preserved. But that means that he will end up with a deficit in terms of learning additional Torah. And he said he was unable to give up learning Torah. He says he can't be mevater on this. He's not willing to give up on the Talmud Torah that he would be able to garner if he wasn't participating in this important committee. So the Rebbe brings down this story to explain this inyan of l'roiv echav. Was he doing something wrong? Was he doing something right? Siv hey, v'yesh loymar, we might say, Shabir hamachlekas hanal ben Ababli v'Yerushalmi taloi b'chiluk shebineim ba'ofen halimud. So now we're going to circle back, and before we circle back to understanding what was going on with Mordechai and his colleagues, we have to understand where are these colleagues coming from in their headspace. In other words, what's their where do they stand on this argument between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi? So we did that. Oifen halimud b'Talmud Bavli hu b'ribui shakla v'tarya. We know famously that the Talmud Bavli is filled with arguments and back and forth. Ukad isa b'Gemara v'machashakim hishivani. Like the Gemara says that it uses the terms from Tanakh that in darkness I was returned. And the Gemara says that these words refer to Talmuda Shel Bavel, that this describes the scholarship of Bavel. Halimutu, because the way that they learned in Bavel was al derech, was like Adam hamimashesh bechashecha. It's like a person who's in the darkness and is feeling around. Like, I don't know, this has happened to me many, many times on a Shabbos, where I need something from, that I should have taken out from a dark room before Shabbos because, I don't know, maybe my office, I don't have my light open in my office over Shabbos. But then I realize I want a paper, I want a sefer, I want something. So I have to start feeling around in the dark. And anybody who's felt around in the dark, and I have reason to believe we all probably know what that feels like, it necessitates a lot of searching and a lot of effort because you don't have the light. So relating this to the modality of learning in Bavel, there was lahakshes kushiyes, there was asking of a lot of questions, ulalavenes hadbarim hetev, and this was in order to clarify the teachings. There was a lot of feeling around in the dark, a lot of questions, a lot of back and forth, a lot of push-pull, a lot of argument. Kedei lahagia el apshat v'hamaskana ha'amitiyim, in order to arrive at the understanding and to arrive at the true decision. Aval b'Talmud Yerushalmi halimud hu ba'ifin yashar. But the learning that took place in Israel, and specifically in Yerushalayim, was in a much more straightforward way. Like you're looking around in a room that's lit up. Miyad moitzim es hasvara hanechona v'hatirutz. Right away, they found the right way of analyzing, the right theory, and the right way to understand it, and they found the explanation. Like a person who's looking for a certain book in a room that's illuminated, you look at the spine, you see the title, you take it, and you're finished. The nimtza l'chayra, so we find, it would seem, shal pishitas va'ofen liman abavli efshar lifol al yidei limud muat shel chasidim harishonim rak es inyan teirasa mishtameres. It would seem that according to the Bavli, through the chasidim harishonim only being able to learn for a short amount of time, they would only achieve teirasa mishtameres, that their Torah is preserved. That they shouldn't forget what they're learning. But not that it would be like the Yerushalmi says that a bracha enters into their Torah, that they understand and they are able to grasp it immediately. Because it doesn't jibe with how people learned in Bavel. But according to the way that Torah was learned in the time when the Gemara Yerushalmi was being put together, which was about 150 years before Bavel, the Yerushalmi was concluded. But it makes sense, it fits, that there would also be a bracha in their Torah. That they succeeded in understanding and in grasping immediately, and they didn't have to waste time. And this is in consonance with the way that they learned in the time when they were the limudim of Talmud Yerushalmi. It was ba'if and yashar. It was straight. That right away you hit upon the truth of the concept without a lot of grasping around in the dark blindly. Vav.
Can I ask a question?
Sure. always.
Is this implying that you can only imagine to have a bracha in the way that you do something? Because I would have guessed, if you asked me, like, what would the bracha, what would the Bavli see it as, that it has to be that you would have bracha, because here, this is what they struggle with so much. And you would think, oh, great, bracha, like you have it in a different, like more revealed, expanded way. But here they're basically saying we're limited, so we can only imagine that even in the best scenario, we would be so limited. Is that what we're implying, that it's not possible that they could have wished for things to be clear the way it should be?
I hear your question, Khandi. I think I understand the question. I don't know that I have a definitive answer, but here's what, just based on what I understand from the Sikha and nothing else, I don't think the Rebbe is saying that they were limited in what they could have asked for. I think the Rebbe is saying that the way the Gemara Bavli understands the bracha that the Hasidim Harishonim got was that their bracha, that their Torah was preserved, that it was mishtameres. In other words, I don't think the Rebbe is going into what they could have asked for or should have asked for, or if they were limited or not limited, but rather he's saying that how the Gemara describes the bracha that they got is in line, syncs up with how they learned.
It almost seems like, when in the, experiment where the flies can't get out of the jar, they think they can never get out. And then when you lift off the cover, they still can't get out.
Right. And I understand what you're saying. I just don't know if that's what the Rebbe is implying. I don't know, maybe. I don't see it clearly that he's implying that they were limited by their own experiences. So that's why they didn't ask for something more, or they didn't comment that you could hope for something more.
Thank you.
But it could be he's saying what you're saying. I would have to learn it maybe another few times to see, because maybe he is saying what you're saying. I'm not sure. Vav, al pizeh yesh lomer. So now we're finally in the position to circle back and understand what was going on with Mordechai and his colleagues. Al pizeh yesh lomer. So based on everything the Rebbe has explained, we might say, the Rebbe says we might say, right? Or the Rebbe is always very humbly saying, maybe we could say, Shahachiluk bein hanhagas Mordechai, sharotzoi l'shitas roivas Sanhedrin, ubein shitas mixtas Sanhedrin, that the difference between Mordechai's behavior that was embraced and cherished by most of the Sanhedrin, and the opinion of the small part of the Sanhedrin that did not agree with Mordechai, tluya beplukta hanal shebin Bavli Yerushalmi. It aligns with and depends on, it's connected to this difference of opinion between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi. Because after all, HaSanhedrin Hagdoila, the Sanhedrin, Anshe Knesset Hagdoila, Nifcharu mitoich HaSanhedrin Haktana, they were people that alighted to the station of being part of the Sanhedrin Hagdoila because they had previously served on the Sanhedrin Haktana, they served on smaller courts. Shemekoyim b'Yerushalayim, and where was the Sanhedrin? Both the Supreme Court and even the smaller ones, it was in Yerushalayim. And if it wasn't Yerushalayim, it was at least in Israel, or Mistaber Laimar. And so it's plausible to say, Shalimudam al Kolponim Shal Rubam, that the way that they learned, the way that they studied, at least the majority, Haya Keseder Halimut Shal HaYerushalmi, was in the way of the Yerushalmi. Ubifrat Bisman HaMishnah Ba'anshe Knesset Hagdoila, and especially in the time of the Mishnah and the time of the Great Sanhedrin. Aval, however, Gam Az Hayu Tanoim MiBavel. But even at that time, there were some Tanoim that were part of the Sanhedrin who had their roots in Bavel. Al derech shematzinu b'Doros habayim, as we find in the subsequent generations, Hillel Alami Bavel, Hillel came from Bavel. Then we have Reb Nassan Habavli. So Reb Nassan was also from Bavel, Va'ait, and more. Ubefrat Avru Kfar Yosem Mishivim Shana Me'esha Golu, HaCheresh V'Hamasker. And especially because it was already 70 years since the artisans and the gatekeepers were exiled from Yerushalayim. Im Hagoyla Sheheglasa Im Yechanya. And they were exiled with the exile of Yechanya to Bavel. And the Cheresh and the Masker, even though literally it means the artisan and the gatekeepers, but the Mefarshim explain this means the great, great teachers. So who is an Anshe Knesset Gdola? Anshe Knesset Hayu Mishevi Hagoyla. So the Anshe Knesset was comprised of people who came back from the Golos. Asher Hegla Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel Bavel. They had been exiled to Bavel. V'yeshuva Yerushalayim b'Yehuda, and they were returned. B'shana Achas l'Karish, in the first year of Karish. V'hayu b'Bavel nun be'shana, but they had been in Bavel for 52 years. Aval behem gam min ha'Cheresh v'Hamasker she'od b'Yotzim b'Yerushalayim kvar hayu b'ma'alasam zu ba'ofen halimut shalahem. But among them were these great teachers that when they were in Yerushalayim, they were already in this high level of learning. Umipnei zeh savar Mordechai b'Reva Sanhedrin shemuchrachu lismanois lemishnah lemelech letzarech hatzalas nefashos. So that's why Mordechai and most of the Sanhedrin believed that it was necessary that he should put himself in a position to be chosen to become a viceroy in order to save Jewish lives. The im toimar, and if you're going to say im kain kesad yuchal achreiz eli shar b'Sanhedrin ubein anshe knesset gdola shenyanam limud hatayr v'hira, and if you're going to say that once he involved himself in governmental affairs to the extent that he became a viceroy, he should have to leave the anshe knesset gdola. He should have to leave the Sanhedrin because they're all about learning Torah and teaching Torah. Hooray, but the reason he stayed in was because because according to the Yerushalmi, according to where Mordechai was coming from, and most of the Sanhedrin, it was with the idea, as stated in the Yerushalmi, that the Torah had a bracha, that in the small amount of time left to learn Torah, they'd be able to learn with such clarity and such alacrity, they wouldn't lose anything. Lahavin or lahaskil miyat, to understand and to grasp immediately. I'm sorry. I skipped a line. And therefore, Mordechai will have success. It won't only be like the Bavli teaches that your Torah is preserved, elagam lahavin ulahaskil miyad, but he'll have the bracha from the Yerushalmi that he'll understand and he'll grasp immediately. Shetachul olav habracha sheyis ala b'limuda yosem ashalpi meshach zman sheyishar biyada lilimud haTorah. He will have the bracha rain upon him that he should rise in his studies a lot more than would be normally possible in that small time that was allotted for studying Torah. Aval bein chavrei haSanhedrin, but among the Sanhedrin that were in the main on the wavelength of the Yerushalmi, hayu gam miktas elu she'ofen limudim haya b'daima l'derech halimud shel Talmud Bavli. But there was a small demographic that their learning, and it's not just learning, their mindset, okay, their world outlook was more aligned with Bavli. So for them, if somebody from the Sanhedrin were to take off time to get involved in things that are not learning of Torah, the most they could hope or believe could happen was that they would not forget the Torah that they knew. The Torah, their level of Torah would be preserved. She'al yedei hismasus l'nyone askonos v'atzalos nefashos techaser ha'hisafa b'yedias haTorah hanidreshes mechavrei Sanhedrin. They believed that by devoting themselves to communal affairs, inclusive of saving lives, they would lose the necessary edge, the additional learning that is necessary for members of Sanhedrin. I think I saw a comment, so I'm going to open. Shouldn't saving lives be seen differently than davening? How can we apply the halacha regarding davening to saving lives? Okay, so excellent, Hani. The Rebbe is going to speak to that, I believe, shortly. But I think that one thing that the Rebbe is going to say, even before he says that, is they're not saying that there shouldn't be other people that engage in saving lives. They're saying for a member of Sanhedrin, their focus has to remain crystal clear. And it can't become kind of weakened, even by other very important things, because the Sanhedrin has to be the Sanhedrin. So that's v'lachein, and therefore, Pirshu mimenu mix a Sanhedrin. So now we can understand both words that the Rebbe brought to our attention, that the Gemara says they separated. It doesn't say that they went against him, that they disagreed. They separated, and it doesn't say the rest of the Sanhedrin. It says a small portion of the Sanhedrin. Ki etzlem loy haya makam la'ofen avodas shel Mordechai b'rei Sanhedrin, because they were not equipped to do the avodah that Mordechai and the vast majority of the Sanhedrin could do, which would mean to involve himself in the necessary saving of lives, which meant governmental affairs, and also not lose out in the high level of Torah that's necessary to a chaver in the Sanhedrin. But they couldn't do it. So they separated and they went in their derech, they went in their path, they went according to their world outlook and possibly to their capability. Zayin. Now the Rebbe says, Hagam Shel, the Rebbe explains, I think, what Hani, what is their reckoning, and I think we'll kind of speak to your concern. Hagam shelafi shitas Yerushalmi bracha nisenes b'teirasan. Although it's true that the Yerushalmi teaches that the Hasidim Rishonim had a special bracha that saturated their learning of Torah, umipnei zezacha Mordechai lebracha b'teirasa ulahai safa b'yedias haTorah. And so, in alignment with what the Yerushalmi teaches, Mordechai was zeicha to this bracha in his Torah, and to an addition in his Torah knowledge. But still, the Rebbe says, Mikol Makom Yarad Mechashivusoi Etzel Chachamim. But at the same time, we're told that his ranking went down. His importance went down a bit. Mishum Shabitel Midivrei Torah v'nichnas l'shrara. Because he abnegated in the learning of Torah and he went into leadership. He went into governmental affairs. So that explains, Ki yeshna mala miyuchedes b'derach d'teirasam umnasam. Because there is something very special, there's a superlative quality in the learning of Torah, which is to the exclusion of all else. Teirasam umnasam means that their learning of Torah is their craft. This is what they do for a living. The Rebbe says there's something very, very special about this. Shaloi lebatel mehalimu b'pnei shum davar. Not to let go of learning for any reason. Afilu kasher b'poyel lo yechsar al yidei zeh b'hisafa b'yedias haTorah lefisha bracha nisenes b'teirasan. Even when practically no Torah knowledge will be missing because of a special bracha, but still, for people who Tairasam umnasam, for those people who their Torah is, learning Torah is their is their vocation. It's their work. It's the only thing they do. It's their life. There's something about that. Vizu kavanas Chazal gadol Talmud Torah yosem etzal nefashos. And this is what Chazal is teaching us, that for those specific people, learning Torah is greater than saving lives. Sheyeshna gadlus bihis masrus muchletes l'liban haTorah. There is a very specific greatness in absolute devotion to limud haTorah, absolute devotion to the exclusion of all else. And because when Mordechai did what he did, and he got involved in governmental affairs in order to save lives, so this greatness was lessened. Nigram gam miut yirida b'chashivusa etzel chachamim. And so vis-a-vis these chachamim, his greatness went down a notch. Shebemakom lahaskira basar daled niskarak basar chamisha. Instead of being the fifth ranking member of the Sanhedrin, he became the sixth ranking member. Umikol makom, and nevertheless, in other words, surely Mordechai understood this. He understood the ramifications of his choice, and nevertheless, Savar Mordechai v'imay Reva Sanhedrin shahaya alav liyos mishnah lamelech. Mordechai concluded, he believed, and so did most of the Sanhedrin, that he must become the viceroy. Although this meant that he would be missing the greatness of limud haTorah to the exclusion of all else. Because it's all worthwhile to save lives. To be looking out for the positive developments for his nation, and to be a positive spokesperson for all of his seed. And so Mordechai came to the conclusion, as well as the vast majority of the Sanhedrin, that this is what he must do, irrespective of the fact that he personally will suffer a demotion in his greatness. Ches. But the Rebbe says it's still not completely computing. It's true that because of the special bracha, as outlined in Gemara Yerushalmi, Mordechai wasn't, in the final analysis, missing any additional Torah study. And it's true that there is something about saving lives that is more important even than his going down in rank. That saving lives is more important than his being in that category, in that cohort of people who Torah is their whole life. But still and all, even after we understand that he had a special bracha, and practically speaking, he wasn't less steeped in Torah knowledge. And after we understand that they made a calculation, and Mordechai and most of the Sanhedrin came to the conclusion that it was more important to save lives. But after all of this, the Rebbe says, Ech nishar Mordechai gam achar kach chaver Sanhedrin. But still in all, how did he remain a member of the Sanhedrin? Shelach Eira, seemingly, kol inyanam hurak limud haTorah v'hayra. Seemingly, the Sanhedrin is devoted exclusively to learning Torah and teaching Torah. So once he becomes the viceroy, once he becomes so enmeshed in diplomatic overtures, how does he remain part of the Sanhedrin? Besignon acher, or to say this differently, how is it possible? Shia mutal chiyuv ala Sanhedrin gufa, Shekol in Yanam Hu Torah Canal, Levater al Malas Terasim Nosim L'Tzarech HaSalas Nefashos. Good, it's true that everybody would say that saving lives is more important. But how can you foist that upon the Sanhedrin? Why would it be a chiyuv? Why would it be an obligation of Mordechai? In other words, we understand it's very, very important, but let other people do it. The Sanhedrin is the Sanhedrin, and they should have laser focus on study of Torah and teaching Torah, and that's it. The Rebbe explains that the explanation is as follows. Isa Batana de Beliyahu, the Medrash explains that Haya Lahem, the Sanhedrin Gedela, Leilech, the Sanhedrin, the great Sanhedrin used to go, Ulikshar Chavolim Shel Barzel B'Masnehem, and they used to take like belts made up of iron, put them around their loins, Ulahagbia Bigdeim Lamala Me'erkvosehen, and they used to lift their clothing, their garments, up above their knees. V'yachzru b'chol ayaris Yisrael v'yilamdu es Yisrael. They did this in order to travel. In other words, scholars that are staying in one place do not need to arrange their garments in such a way that they will not be soiled and dirtied by the mud and the water that they have to traverse. Remember, this was before vehicular travel, right? So at most, they're traveling on animals. And yet, the Medrash tells us that the members of the great Sanhedrin would hoist their clothing like people that were involved in trade or other vocations. And they did this in order to travel to the various cities and teach Bnei Yisrael Torah. V'hine hadinhu. And we know that the halacha is Sanhedrin shagolsa mimkaima balishkas agazis ena yechayla ladun dine nefashos. And we know that a Sanhedrin that is exiled from their particular, let's just say, chambers, which was called the Lishkas Hagazis, and this was a chamber in the temple compound in the Beis Hamikdash. So people that are part of the Sanhedrin or the Sanhedrin entire, if it's exiled from that specially appointed space, then they lose their ability to adjudicate on capital cases. So that means that means that these members of the Sanhedrin that were sent to teach Torah, or they went and they taught Torah to all the Jews, nigremes yirida b'koicha u'b'takfa shel Sanhedrin. It meant that they experienced a demotion, a lessening, an amelioration in their strength as a Sanhedrin. And nevertheless, they understood that it was their obligation to travel to all the cities where Jews lived to teach Torah. Hari move on mizah. So the Rebbe says, what do we understand from this? She'ikar tafkidim shel Sanhedrin hu hayra l'rabim v'al yidei zeh hatzalas rabim. So the Rebbe says, now we understand the true tafkid, the true job of the Sanhedrin differently. Once we understand what this Medrash is explaining to us, we understand that the main job is not necessarily to learn as much as it is to teach. And to teach the rabbin, that means the populace, not just like the upper crust, not just like the elite, but to travel to the cities and to teach the rabbin. And the Rebbe says in parentheses, and through this to save the rabbin. And for this purpose, tzrichim heim leired mikoicham v'takfam b'tor Sanhedrin. And they did this even though it meant that they would lose their strength and their stature as a Sanhedrin. But they did this kedei liyos mimzake harabim. They did this for the rabbin. They did this to be mizaka the rabbin, to give the populace, to give Bnei Yisrael what they needed. And the Rebbe says, and it's exactly this explanation, It's exactly this idea that clarifies what was going on at the time of Mordechai, and then the Rebbe is, of course, going to tell us what we need to do about this. Although through Mordechai becoming the viceroy, this caused a demotion. It caused for him to be lower ranking as a member of the Sanhedrin. Mibasar Dalid lebasar Chamisha. He went from being ranked fifth highest to being sixth highest. Because he was missing this superlative quality of being a person that is engaged in the study of Torah to the exclusion of all else. Mikol Makayim. Kedaisi Hayarida. Nevertheless, it was kedai. It was worthy. It was the correct thing for him to, I don't want to use the word suffer, the demotion, but for him to be demoted. Afilu mitzad inyan shel Sanhedrin atzma. And not just because he made a cost-benefit analysis that that's what the Jews need from me now more. But but as a member of the Sanhedrin, he did the right thing. In other words, this is an important point. It's not just that, okay, Mordechai is a very gifted person. He's a great scholar, and he could choose to enmesh himself exclusively in the study, but he's also very well connected, and he's a great diplomat, and only he can achieve this high ranking of viceroy, and he has to make a choice. But the Rebbe is saying no. Once we understand what the Medrash just told us, we understand that as a Chaver HaSanhedrin itself, as a member of the Sanhedrin itself, it was incumbent upon him, like the members of the Sanhedrin that used to hoist their garments because of necessity and travel, they would be dirtied if they didn't do that, in order to go out to the communities and teach the Jews. Because this is what the Sanhedrin had to do, because this was l'teivas harabim. This was for the good of the people, just like the Medrash explains to us. And now the Rebbe says in Seif Tes, Hanagasa shel chayk meri chami admar hisol l'gzoil min hazman shahaya bi'echolta la'asek b'liban ha'torah la'atzmai va'avodas Hashem la'atzmai u'lis'asek b'shas elu binyane askanus v'atzalas nefashos. My father-in-law, the Rebbe says, used to quote unquote steal time from the time that he could have been studying Torah. He could have been studying Torah for himself, could have been engaging in his own avodas Hashem, and he stole time from that in order to work during those hours in communal affairs and save lives. And of course, it makes you think about how much time the Rebbe stole from his time to stand and give dollars to the populace and all the other things.
Rivky. I think it's a story from the Friedrich Rebbe. I'm not sure which the Friedrich, but I think where Chassid comes, that Rebbe wants him to get involved in Tzarchei Tzibur, in communal work, and he cries because it's taking him away from his study. And the Friedrich Rebbe cried with him. He said, it needs to get done. What should we do? It needs to get done. So it just came to mind while you're saying this.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Esther. And the Rebbe says, and this was an important demand that he made from a great group of his Talmidim and those who were connected to him, that they too should comport themselves in this way. And he also enacted that even the Talmidim in yeshiva, where you might say, okay, when people get older and they've already accomplished a lot in their learning Torah, and they already have a very solid basis for their avodas Hashem, that then you could see why they would have to steal from that time to help the Jewish people. But the Friedrich Rebbe actually set it up that even the Talmidim should take a certain amount of time, bein hasdarim, not from the Seder of learning, but between the Seder of learning, they should take that time to spread Torah chutza out into the larger thoroughfare. So think the Lubavitch model of the children going on Mivtzaim on Friday afternoon. So no yeshiva has Seder Friday afternoon, but kids could be doing other things. But they're going on their routes. Upamim shes askus hi ba'ofen kazeh shechela gadol mizman ha'afatza mukdash loy le'etzem halimud mazulas ela letzorchei tzibor. And many times, this kind of involvement, the way it shakes out is that a very large amount of time is not dedicated to actually teaching, but it's dedicated to all the needs that people need. So, like a lot of times we could get upset when we look at like what percentage of the time am I actually teaching or having a conversation with this person about Torah and mitzvahs, and how much time am I preparing for whatever venue or whatever framework it'll be where I'm going to meet this person. And you might say, like, look at this, it's like just a tiny fraction of time because there are all these other needs that Jews have. Hishtadlus b'kabbalas talmidim b'siddur makam l'limudam. You have to engage in overtures for accepting talmidim, welcoming them, and then getting their learning in order. Then you have to do fundraising and you have to gather the necessary funds. This all sounds very familiar, right? It's not like most of our time we feel like, oh wow, we're actually in Gan Eden because we're teaching, or we're having this deeply spiritual experience or conversation. V'hainu, she'afilu mikusharim ke'elu, shematzavam v'dargasam himrak kipsak halacha shel babli ba'oven shel terasa mishtameres. And still, this means that the Frierdiker Rebbe understood that even those amongst those who were connected to him, they were his mikusharim, and they were on a level where it was more aligned with the Bavli, that the most they could hope for is that when they were engaged in these communal affairs and they weren't learning, the most they could hope for was that their learning would be preserved. Aleim lahakdish mizmanam letzerech teves harabim. They too have to take of their time and set it aside for the good of the rabbim, of the many. Even if they'll be missing in their own learning of Torah and in their own avodas Hashem. Because the Ragat Shavar's lifestyle, the way he comported himself, he rak avor yechidei skula b'chol dor. Shehem b'fchinas terasam umnasam. This is just for a select few. In every generation, there are just a few about whom you could say terasam umnasam, that their learning of Torah is their vocation. It is the only thing they do with their life. V'inyanim hu al derech shahaya etzel mixas Sanhedrin, haysafa b'yedias haTorah ba'efen tamidi, and that their inyan is like it was by a small portion of the Sanhedrin, that they actually are constantly generating additional knowledge of Torah, because that's all they devote themselves to. But for the vast majority, even B'nai Torah, even people who are studying all the time, who kipsak hadin, that is according to the psak, shebizman hazeh ein lanu talmidei chachamim sheterasam umnasam. That today we don't have talmidei chachamim that fall into this category, about which it says terasam umnasam. V'imkein, and if so, hari hadvarim kal b'chemer. So how much more so? If for other things they take away from learning Torah, how much more so they should chisel away at their time of learning Torah for saving lives and for doing things that the community needs. In other words, today we don't really have people who are studying in such unremitting fashion that you could say that this is their entire life. The psak din is that we don't have. So if people are taking time off from learning for other things, how much more so they have to take off for saving lives. And we should mention that regarding the Friedrich Rebbe himself, how we don't know his greatness, his stature. And it's known, the Baal Shem Tov taught on the pasuk, arise and shine, because your light and your radiance and the glory of Hashem presides over you. So the Baal Shem Tov taught, Atem Nesiya Yisrael. This is talking about the leaders of the Jews. Shemanichem es haTorah v'avodah shalachem b'shvil tovas harabim. That, so I'm sorry, I should say it like this. Atem Nesiya Yisrael. The Baal Shem Tov taught that this pasuk is talking to you, the leaders of Israel, that you leave aside your own Torah and your own avodah, b'shvil tovas harabim, for the good of the people. Ma yehe alechem. So what will be upon you? Kumi ori ba'ar haprati laklali. That this pasuk is telling you, rise and shine in the light, from the light of your individuated work to the communal work, and then the true light of Hashem will shine upon you. Hainu, meaning Shenesiya Yisrael, that the leaders amongst Israel, yesh lahem bracha miyuchedes, that they have a special blessing. Shelo yechsar b'torah b'avodah shalahem. They will not be missing in their Torah and in their avodah. Adrab, on the contrary, ba oirech ukvoid havaya alayich zorach, alecha zorach. That not only will they be missing, but the light and a spectacular light of Hashem and kavod of Hashem will preside upon you. And this is so much more than what the Yerushalmi teaches, that a bracha will be within their Talmud, within their learning of Torah. Yud, the last seif, the Rebbe says, "V'zui ha'ira aleinu." And this is the lesson for us. Mihanhagas Mordechai b'negei l'poel, from Mordechai's the way he conducted himself to how we have to conduct ourselves, practically speaking. Ukiteres haBaal Shem Tov hayedua, and like the well-known Torah of the Baal Shem Tov al Maimer HaMishnah, on the Mishnah that says HaKares HaMegillah L'Mafreya Lo Yatza. So the Mishnah teaches that if you read the Megillah not in the order that it has to be read, you have not fulfilled your obligation. But the Baal Shem Tov taught, Misha Kares HaMegillah v'soiver Shaha Misupar b'Megillah hu davar she'ira ba'avar. Anyone who reads the Megillah and thinks that what the Megillah is talking about is something that happened in the past, limafreya, like out of order, not now, the ein le shaychus lahayve, and that it doesn't have relevance and connection to the present, lo yatza. If that's how you learned, if that's how you read the Megillah, you didn't fulfill your obligation. What's demanded of us, is aligned with a little bit, a tiny, at least a little drop of how Mordechai comport himself. We have to become viceroy. In other words, we have to use opportunities to be as influential as we can be. in order to be looking out for the best interests and the best result for our nation and for all of our seed, for all people. Even if it means that not everybody will agree. We will lose the popularity contest. We will go down in ranking, perhaps. People will look at us and say, what's up with you Lubavitchers, running to prisons and old age homes and who knows where to read the Megillah for this one and that one, and then what kind of suda are you going to have for your family, or how much time are you going to have to be doing what you should be doing on Purim. And although for many there will be a yerida, this will mean that there'll be some demotion spiritually. Shekain l'shem kach yaleim levater al shleimusam haprotis, because they're going to have to give up on being as perfect as they would be in their own avodah. It's necessary and it's kedai. It's the proper thing in order for there to be taivas harabim, for the good of the many. I don't think the Rebbe is here saying Chalila that we can give up on what we have to do halachically, chas v'shalom, or even give up on minhagim. But the Rebbe is saying that if you didn't have to worry about other people, you could enjoy a different level of Torah and Avodah. But he says it's kedai. That was a decision that Mordechai made. And the Rebbe says, and we actually find this exact trajectory in every person's life, their own personal life. Why? Because nishmasa yeredas. Because the beginning of life is that the neshama has to go down. It goes down me'igra rama. It goes down from this very, very, very elevated summit, libira amigda, to a very, very low abyss. And why does the neshama come down? Kedei liyos mosheles v'sheletas alaguf. It comes down to be a mishneh lamelech. It comes down to be a viceroy over the body. Ala nefesh habahamis, to reign over our nefesh habahamis, ve'al chelkai be'olam, and to reign over our part in this world. Every neshama has chelkai be'olam, its part in the world that it has to elevate. Lichbosh oisam v'la'asoisam dir lo yisbarach. So the neshama gets demoted, as it were, from its spiritual height to come down to this lowly place in order to reign over the Nefesh Bahamis and our place in this world, and to conquer this part of the world, to make it a Dir Lo Yisbarach, to make it a dwelling place for Hashem. V'achakach, and afterwards, Kishenoise Isha, when a man marries a woman, Ba Haisafa Alanal, there's an addition to this. Like the Megillah says, each man reigning in his home. And like the Chazal teach, who is the woman of valor, the valorous woman, the one who does what her husband desires. I can't help but just insert that in other places the Rebbe taught the same Maimer Chazal and taught Ezehi Isha Kashera, who is the valorous woman. Ha'oiseh, she makes Ritzain Baila. She makes the desire of her husband. She creates the desire of her husband, but that's not for now. V'gam shrara zu yesh ba mishum yerida. And in this governmental position, as it were, in this leadership position, there is a spiritual demotion. Like Chazal taught us, that when you marry your wife, you go down in level. Because ideally, there's a spiritual demotion, because now you're going to have to give up on some of your davening and learning and all the spiritual things that you were involved in as a bacher, because now, marriage necessitates you being involved in other things. But the Rebbe says, but this is the whole life of a Yid. V'zuhi gam hasbara b'ma shematzinu ilui ba'eskim b'terche tzibur. Afilu al pnei mi sheterasam umnasam. And the Rebbe says, and this explains why we find that there is a superlative quality about those who are Eisek B'terchei Tzibor, who involve themselves for the good of the community, that there's a distinct advantage even over those who learn Torah to the exclusion of all else. She'elu she'terasam umnasam tzrichim lahafzik l'kriyas shema. Those who learn to the exclusion of all else have to stop learning when it comes time to fulfill the mitzvah of Kriya Shema. Avol ha'oiskim b'tzorchei tzibor einam mafsikim afilu Kriya Shema. But those who are engaged in doing something for the good of the community, then halachically, you don't stop even to fulfill the mitzvah of Kriya Shema. Ki hagam shehis askus b'tzorchei tzibor be'emuna geiremes chisaron la'adam b'limat ha'torah v'shleimus atzmai, because although engaging in communal affairs, in good faith, for the right reason, causes a deficit in a person's level of Torah study, and it could cause a lack of completion in their spiritual stature. Ad she'amru Chazal, so much so that Chazal taught, Hatel alein tzorchei tzibor v'hein kolen me alehin. If you throw upon them the needs of the community, they'll be finished, meaning their personal lives will be finished. And still, mikol mokem, and still in all, davka b'zeh v'al yedei zeh ba'ilui hanifla shel tovas harabim. But it's precisely through this and because of this that you gain the superlative and awesome advantage of doing for the community. And if to physically save people, it's necessary to do what Mordechai did. How much more so this is true about saving the soul, saving Jews spiritually. Sheyesh levater al hashlemus haprotis l'shem hatzalos nefashos. That there are times where, yes, we will have to give up on our personal perfection in order to save souls. Liyes doiver shalom l'chol zaron, in order to look out for the peace and the good of all of our seed, all of our children, ad asher Yisrael oisin tshuva, until all of Bnei Yisrael do tshuva, umiyad heim negolin, and immediately we are redeemed, and it should be bekar of mamash. It should be very soon, immediately mamash, practically very, very soon now. Yes, seeing to what length we're explaining Mordechai is giving up a little something for the benefit of the cloud. Well, it seems it's more than a little something. How much more so can we appreciate Esther's Mesiras Nefesh? Yes, absolutely. Sorry, somebody wanted to say something.
I was saying, hi, Rivky, how are you? Hi, everybody. I was just saying that, I mean, the shluchim, I mean, I know many shluchim that would be, I can't say Yechidei Skula, but they would be great, amazing Talmidei Chachamim. They weren't busy, and wegen fundraising, that what are they busy with? And I mean, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like I yesterday, my husband was saying he's going to make a olive oil factory, an olive oil place, making it kosher Pesach for the few people that won't eat the okay olive oil we have here. I'm like, it was very hard for me. I'm like,
Listen, but
Enough.
the Rebbe says that even though there'll be his askos and so many other things, including fundraising, the Rebbe said, I just realized I forgot at the beginning of class. I'm sorry. I just want to say that it should be l'schos Rav Yosef Yitzchak Ben Sima Chassia for refuah shalema miyad. I'm sorry, I forgot that. And it's look. This is an old question. It seems that the fundraising is a very important part of the shlichus. The Rebbe wanted to be mezaka all these yidden in the avodah.
No, but I'm saying even that. I gave an example of
Yeah.
yesterday. I was
The
going
olive
to
oil.
make, like I'm saying, like the olive oil, like Abish there,
It's all part of the avodah that has to be done.
Rivky,
No, so when you spoke about Yechidus Gula and different things,
No, you're
I know
right.
many people that would have been like unbelievable in the world of Torah if they,
If we weren't zeichet to have a Rebbe who cared l'chol zarei.
obviously. So I'm just saying, it's
Yeah.
like they're not Mordechai's, and we're not Sanhedrin, and we're not Yechidus Gula, but it's there's no question about it.
Yeah, no, you're not getting any pushback from me. You're right.
No,
Esther.
and I read this book over Shabbos. By the way, I don't know. I bought it and my husband bought it. So I had two. So I said it must be that I should read it. It's my Gulag Life.
I remember.
And it's about Mendel Futterfass. So and it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing after he was liberated. After he was liberated, what did he do? Abish said, it's like unbelievable. And that made me think about what you're saying now. Like, you would think he came out of Russia and he a kappa gehat, L'chaim.
Thank you, Rachi. Chaim. Esther.
what I find fascinating here is we're talking about a time that is the beginning of Torah Sheba'al Peh being written down.
Mhm.
There was no Gemara yet. There's no Mishnah yet. It's the beginning of the right. This is the first Golos after being a people in Eretz Yisrael 900 years. And Torah Sheba'al Peh was passed on Ba'al Peh. And now it is the first Golos that you have to now, and they get permission to write Torah Sheba'al Peh, which takes generations and generations. But now the learning is absolutely life-saving, because if they didn't, how would we have Mishnah, Gemara, anything today? Halacha, right? So we're talking about a time that the learning was absolutely life-saving till the time of Mashiach, L'deres, that Yiddishkeit can be kept. Because without Torah Sheba'al Peh written, where would we be, right? Nevertheless, even in this, the Rebbe says, Yechidei Gula. It is understood why they said this is crucial, because this is also life-saving. How are we going to survive as a people? Yet the Rebbe says, so today, when we have the Slonim and we have the leaders, it is just interesting that even then, it's Mordechai that say it is crucial that Tzarchei Tzibur. And yes, there are a few, and maybe you won't qualify, or maybe you're going to go down in status. But nevertheless, we have Purim today. I mean, we have these, Mordechai saved us physically. Not only that, he lifted all the children. They sat and learned. He did, there's a generation of leadership in children when he sat to learn with the children. And yet you must have those who say this is Nasai, because this was the future. There was no Torah Sheba'al Peh written yet. This was the very beginning. So how much more so today? Anyway.
Yeah. An easy fast to everybody and a Freilich Purim. And it should already be even a hapachu, everything from Galus to Geula immediately.
Amen.
Thank you.
It's interesting to me, Chani writes that the Rebbe says this is every one of our mission, although with the Sanhedrin, some of them didn't get involved. Yeah, I think the Rebbe is saying that in this Dar, Ikvas the Mashiach, it's all in, everybody.
I don't know, Rivky, because I think what Esther, what you said made me think that this generation now, we need like Chassidus brought down to the masses, and I'm talking about also like in work. I don't know how you say it in English, like
In reach.
in reach, and probably there are many svarim written books, not svarim, that there are podcasts. So we need those people that are giving out these podcasts with this and reaching people, because I think this is like that time of writing the Mishnah, and the time of the Baal Shem Tov, and the Alter Rebbe, the teaching of Chassidus. But I'm saying now Chassidus on our level, somebody's got to get it out to the people in a way that's palpable for them. That's what I'm saying.
So that's the work of Mordechai. That's the work. That's what the Rebbe is saying. You could be sitting.
I understand, but I'm saying now this generation, the generation of Tashim Pei Gimel, people that are dedicated to disseminating Chassidus written or podcast or in a way of social media that could catch people.
Yeah,
that it's and even in reach, it's somebody should dedicate to that. So, special people that otherwise would be doing something else. Anyway, whatever. I like to complain, I think. Anyway, happy Purim, everybody. Sorry.
you're not complaining. You're right. And I think there are a lot of people that are on it already, and we need more. Afreilach Purim. It looks like somebody else wanted to say something. I don't know your full name. BN.
No, I just unmuted Rivky's Bunya to say thank you.
Oh, Bunya, hi.
Good morning.
Good morning to you, and easy fast and Afreilach Purim.
To everybody, thank you.
All right, Kol Tov, everybody.
Yeah. Have a easy fast of Purim.
Amen to all of us.